Well, good morning and welcome to Vedanta Hall for our celebration of the Buddha's birthday. And welcome to those who have already joined us via Zoom, and perhaps a few more will pop up. And we're recording this and we'll be uploading it to YouTube later. So welcome to those who join us later via YouTube. I'm hoping we'll get a few more showing up soon here to be with us in person. We're very happy to have our guest speaker, Walter Mason, and partner and his parents joining us today. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Walter, of course, for accepting the invitation. Hold on, I've got to get rid of somebody there. Okay, that's better. And Walter is a very devoted Buddhist, and he's no stranger to Vedanta as well. He knows about Vedanta, Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and he's familiar with many of our publications because Walter worked in the Ajahn bookshop for many years, which some of you may know about. And Ajahn bookshop was our biggest customer, and sadly they're no more, but there was a very good service they provided for all those years that they're in existence. Speaking of books, Walter is the author of two books, Destination Saigon and Destination Cambodia, and they are drawing on the months, or perhaps maybe it's even years, Walter, that you've spent in Vietnam and Cambodia. And he's had so many anecdotes, just overflowing with anecdotes, those two books. Walter's also the president of the Charles Dickens Society and a popular blogger and speaker. I follow Walter on Facebook, and he's just pops up everywhere. There are so many engagements, so many talks he's giving all the time. This morning, Walter is going to present a PowerPoint presentation and talk on loving kindness and the Buddhist philosophy of Metta and its application in everyday life. And this will be followed by Pravrajika Gayatripranaji's talk on Buddha and Swami Vivekananda. And then after that, please stay back and get a share of the offered sweets and savories. So now I'll request Walter to come and present his talk and PowerPoint presentation. Thanks, Walter.
Is there a clip out of it? Is there a clip out of it?
Oh, no, I don't remote one. You have to.
I'm not to you?
You have to prompt me here.
Fantastic. No problem. Good morning, everyone, and blessings. Robert's just getting the PowerPoint presentation up so we can talk about Metta. I think that often we talk about these things that we need to learn the most, and it has always been the case for me. I am a person of rather alarming emotions and shifts in mood, and so the journey of Metta, of loving kindness, has been something that's been a big part of my life. So this is what we're talking about. Some of you might know Metta more as Maitri, benevolence, loving kindness, friendliness, amity, what a beautiful word, goodwill, and active interest in others, which is an important note, I think. So Metta is the Pali word for it, Pali being the ancient holy language of Buddhism, which is still used in many, many countries when they perform their liturgy. These days in English, it's normally known as loving kindness. a great sort of, I speak and write on this often, and it's you know, does one capitalize it or put a hyphen or put it as one word sometimes? It's still a term that's coming into being, and we don't quite know how to express it. But it's an idea that's easily dismissed in a cynical age like ours. You know, should we be loving and kind towards everyone, towards the people we disagree with? And the answer, of course, is always a resounding yes. But some people would flippantly say that it's an unwise, sunny way to look at a world that might accuse us of being Pollyannas. I don't know if you've read that novel, Pollyanna. It's always spoken of despairingly, and I reread it a few years ago, and it's a beautiful and deeply philosophical novel, which raises lots and lots of questions. So I'm not quite so dismissive of Pollyanna, actually. I think it can be read as a philosophical text. But there's nothing about metta that is easy, or giving in, or in some way sort of leading an easier life. And it's also not about dismissing the darkness. You know, to acknowledge loving kindness is also to recognize that there are other qualities out there in the world that we have to deal with on a daily basis. It's a way we choose to move through the world. If we embrace loving kindness, then we choose it. And once we've made that choice, it's important to sort of be active in our pursuit of it. I believe in my heart that loving kindness, looking at the world through the lens of loving kindness, is quite transformative. It's something that will change us and does change people, because we are making conscious choices every moment of our lives. So each moment we make a choice. Is it going to be a choice based on loving kindness, or is it going to be a choice based on something else, on something that's more dismissive or possibly more negative? Robert? Now, metta is one of the Brahma Vihara. So I love the Brahma Viharas. Here they are. I made a sunflower for you so you could see them all. So they have beautiful names. Metta, which you now know as loving kindness. Karuna, which is compassion. Mudita, which is sympathetic joy. I think it's a lovely quality as well. The unconditional happiness for the happiness of others. And upekkha, which is equanimity. People always ask me what that means. And equanimity is, of course, a reasonably unemotional state, a way of remaining neutral about the things that happen to you. The Thai writer V. Vajirameti, who's a very interesting man, he's a sort of Buddhist agony aunt in the press in Bangkok. But he teaches that the Brahmavihara of metta is a way to deal with life, to deal with our family, to deal with our work situations. Because the fact is that possibly even this morning, or maybe certainly this afternoon, you're going to rub up against someone else who doesn't live the same way you live, or who doesn't think the same way you do. And if we make the choice of metta, then we can deal with those people really well. If we choose some other way, it can cause prickly circumstances, because that's guaranteed. We all move through the world with our ideas and preconceptions and prejudices, and unfortunately, not everyone shares them with us. You know, we know we're right, but there's unfortunate people out there aren't, and we're going to have to deal with them on a day-to-day basis. If we make the decision to deal with them with loving kindness and care and regard, it makes the world a much better place. As the Venerable Monk says, we regard people in a friendly way, as family, as friends, with love, generosity, and kindness. And this word generosity, I think, is a really important one, because we need to be generous in our understandings of other people, because sometimes people say something that's awkward, or sometimes people don't know the things that we know and say something that we think is unwise or based in ignorance. We have to be generous in our interpretations of what people say to us. And I think it's worth noting, especially in this age of social media, when someone says something a little tiny bit wrong and everyone leaps on top of them and wants to tear them apart. So loving kindness is not about sort of a schmaltzy, insipid, you know, a 1960s hippie peace man sort of way of viewing the world. It's actually quite a difficult thing to do. The next one, yep. It's actually quite a difficult thing to do. And it allows us to exhibit a great deal of substance once we get it right. Metta requires us keeping in touch with our hearts and our minds and trying to work out with wisdom how to function in the world. And it's important to introduce that note of wisdom as well, because we can't just act out of love and kindness, because that might cause us to do something foolish. You know, if we see a little child run out on the road, you know, we can't just sort of call out, "Hello, lovely." You know, we have to actually go and grab that child. We have to act with wisdom as well. But every day a new situation arises that requires from us some sort of reaction. And metta is about choosing a loving reaction to all of those things that pop up every day. One of the most important of the sacred teachings of the Buddha is the Metta Sutta. There's lots and lots of versions of it on the internet. It's a very short read. It's a very practical read. And it's become one of the sort of central texts of Buddhism in its explanation of how we can cultivate loving kindness towards ourselves and others. The sutta says that, Robert, if we can get this, do not perform the slightest wrong for which people may censure you. Instead reflect, may all beings be happy and safe. It's a lovely reminder. It's the sort of thing you could get tattooed if you were doing tattoos. I illustrate this with an image of Kuan Yin. Kuan Yin is, of course, the Chinese sort of manifestation of Avalokitesvara, the great bodhisattva of compassion and loving kindness, who was sort of signified into this form, and is probably familiar to many Sydneysiders because of the presence of so many Chinese and Vietnamese people in our culture who revere Kuan Yin. And so I like to keep her around me because she always reminds me of this choice that I've chosen to make. She's even around my neck, so I sort of feel her sometimes when I'm being anxious. But kindness, I don't think we're encouraged to be particularly kind in our culture. There is kindness exhibited by everyone all day, every day, but there's a hardness, I think, at the center point of our culture, which we need to soften somehow with our own personal behavior. Because there is no right to rudeness or unkindness. There really isn't. I mean, so many people seem to think there is, but that's simply not the case. There are instead many small and many boring things that we have to do every day to prove that we've made a commitment to loving kindness. And I think in these actions, we can actually cause a great deal of good in the world. Some of the things I thought of are careful attention to the elderly, the indulgence of the talkative and eccentric, which I'm sure we come up with sometimes, an awareness of the comforts that others might require. So sort of opening ourselves to the possibilities that people need something that we don't. And an acute awareness of just how painful rudeness and bad manners can be to other people. This is something that, as Robert indicated, I'm a great lover of 19th century literature, and Dickens in his novels always wonderfully shows up people who aren't aware of the needs of others. And Jane Austen is even more sort of acutely exploring of this need to attend to the small details of our lives. In Buddhist Asia, people often make intentional pledges, or they go to a statue of Kuan Yin or Avalokitesvara and they make a pledge and say, I want to do this thing in my life. I've listed here, sorry, you may not be able to see some of them, observing intense periods of prayer and recitation, or observing periods of vegetarianism if people aren't normally vegetarian, and many other things. And people in our society often say, well, this is cynical, this is obvious behavior. You're sort of bargaining with another power. And that's not the case at all, because loving kindness doesn't come easily. And sometimes we need to do something that's physical and conscious in order to remind ourselves to do that thing. And so I'm big on the idea of repledging myself to loving kindness as the year progresses. One of the things that I do, and I know you don't do this, but I do it, is I find myself rehearsing situations in my brain where people have said something I didn't like. And, you know, it could be 2 days later and I'm still working out in my brain, you know, brilliant comebacks I could have made. You know? And I realized that I've been nursing this unhealthy attitude for 2 days. And that's when I say to myself, gosh, I need to shift my brain again into loving kindness, because this is not good for me. And that's the key. To live a life of loving kindness is to be good to yourself, not just to other people. And switching it around, being good to other people is always being good to yourself as well, because this kindness sort of moves in 2 directions. So yeah, patterns of uncharitable thought and speech are worth observing, and it's something that you can really consciously do, especially in your work life. The idea is to make your very presence a gift to the world, to be the sort of person who people look forward to seeing, to be the sort of person who brings a smile to others. Surely, I think that's a good lifelong project. You know, I don't seek to be the best sort of writer in the world or the smartest teacher or speaker, but I do seek to be someone that others love to see and who can make others smile and be happy. And that's something that's based deeply in my practice of loving kindness. The quality of metta is cultivated through our daily actions and also through the practice of a really short meditation. And there are lots of them on the internet that you can listen to, but it's a lovely thing to do. And ultimately, it comes down to wishing others well. It's such a simple message, isn't it? But simply to wish others well. At the end of the Metta Sutta, which is recited every day in Theravadan monasteries, they say, whatever beings there are, may they be free from suffering in mind and body. It's a lovely way to leave something. The Thai Buddhist monks who are just sort of up the road here in Annandale, they have a beautiful temple there. And before COVID, at least, they had prayers every evening in Pali, but they always finished with the Metta Sutta in English. And when I used to go regularly, I used to love hearing it because they still sort of chanted it in a sing-songy way. And I was always left with this beautiful sort of semi-song in my head saying, whatever beings there are, may they be free from suffering in mind and body. It's a lovely, like a fairy tale to carry in my head, a nursery rhyme to carry in my head. It's something that's good to make myself hear every day. Sharon Salzberg is a wonderful author who I can recommend highly. She's written a book called Loving Kindness. And she said, the unbounded heart of the Buddha can be our own as well. And I think it's a lovely way to think of it. We're actually sharing in the heart of the Buddha when we are acting out of a place of loving kindness in our lives. There is an expansiveness to loving kindness that doesn't exist in other ways of thinking. And this, I think, is at the heart of the Buddha's teachings. We can open our hearts, we can expand, we can be great big people. One of Sharon Salzberg's books is called A Heart as Wide as the World, which I think is a lovely term. But it's also practice. It's not easy. It is hard work. And I think spirituality is often sort of hard work, and we shouldn't shirk from that work. And we shouldn't imagine that it's not going to be something that's difficult and that asks something of us. I always say, you know, loving kindness is a skill. It's something that has to be practiced and studied, like Chinese or bodybuilding. You know, it's something that's going to be a lifelong study. It never really ends. The wonderful Venerable Master Chingung talks about what worries. Worries are what wear us down. They're the things that tear at our minds, and loving kindness helps us deal with those worries. We can say to ourselves, you know, you're worried, that's fine, but don't carry this with you. allow this worry to happen and then just leave it be. You don't have to bring it with you everywhere you go in your world. When we acknowledge our worries and our own suffering through the practice of loving kindness, we actually realize that everyone else in the world shares these worries, these unhappinesses. Everyone suffers. That's the first noble truth of the Buddha. There is suffering. And once we acknowledge that suffering in ourselves, we can notice that everyone else is carrying it. And it makes us a whole lot less judgmental and a whole lot more loving when we can see, you know what, I recognize that fear. I recognize that shyness. I recognize that awkwardness. It's a universal quality. These things are all something that we share. So having this knowledge with us at all times makes us more expansive people. And we fail. We fail day to day. You know, I fail constantly. You know, someone takes too long at the ATM in front of me and I get grumpy with them, you know. Or, you know, someone's driving in a way we disapprove of and we fume at them in the car. There's all sorts of things that happen every day, you know. Or, you know, I know I've got to call my best friend, but I know that he wants something and I don't want to have to deal with that. And you know, a response of loving kindness brings out something better in us, something freer. And meditation is the key to this. And I know I'm talking to a room full of meditators, but I really stress that it brings this larger way of looking at the world into practice. It inhabits our bodies. And being inhabited with loving kindness is something that is a Brahma Vihara. It's an abode of joy that we can live in this way. Living with loving kindness is called Piyavaka, kindly speech. And that's something that we should practice, and it's something we're always honing. It's not flattery. It's not insincerity. It's being kind when we talk to people. And I always give the example of when someone says to you, "What do you think of my new haircut?" That's a great way to practice Piyavaka, kindly speech, because they're not actually asking you what you think of it. They're kind of asking you to say a nice thing to them. You know, they probably spent 3 hours at the hairdresser and spent $160 or so on that haircut. They don't want you to say, "It's ghastly," you know, makes your face look fat, you know. They're not the right answers. It's the only right answer is ever, "It looks lovely." Because, you know, what's my opinion about a haircut worth? You know, that's just my opinion, and mine is not a universal opinion. What are my prejudices worth? What are my judgments worth? That's not what this person needs in their life. This person needs a response of kindness and love. I am not the ultimate arbiter of hairstyles, you know, so I shouldn't really speak as though I am. Our goal is always to love ourselves and to love others more perfectly. This is a constant goal, and it's something that we can do no matter where we are in life, no matter if we're very young or very old, if we're very healthy or very, very sick. I always use the example of a man called Wilson van Dusen, who was a Swedenborgian philosopher. And he talked about when he was dying, he was very, very sick, but still writing, and he felt that he was useless. He felt that he could no longer do good in this world. But one day he woke up and he said, "You know what? I can be really, really kind to the nurses who attend me. I can be really loving to the people who come and see me. I can continue to be useful right up to my very last moment." And that always inspires me. I was a little bit ill in the last week. I had the vaccine and I had a bad response to it, you know, and I had a chance to practice grumpiness if I wanted. But hopefully, my partner might say otherwise, but hopefully I chose not to, because I thought, you know, I'm suffering through this, but why should I make other people suffer as well? I didn't deny my feelings. I didn't deny my pain and unhappiness. I acknowledged those things perfectly and felt them. I just didn't feel the need to sort of express it to the world. And this is what Metta is about. This is what the Buddhist teachings on loving kindness were about. We are all suffering. We are all engaged in thought and worry. But our ultimate responsibility is to exhibit love and generosity and kindness when we move through the world, and to not give ourselves excuses to exhibit other kinds of behaviors. We acknowledge our annoyance, we acknowledge our pain, we acknowledge our hurt. Sometimes people say things that are hurtful, but we do not react in kind, because that is just creating more karma for ourselves. It's a journey. It's something that's difficult, and it's something that you will trip up with every day, that I trip up with every day. You know, there are at least 8 or 9 times during the day when I have a chance to be really harsh-tongued and lash out, and I don't always do that now. I try not to. I often imagine when I'm at the supermarket, you know, and you have the situation where someone pushes in front of you in a self-serve aisle, and they get the very last self-serve spot at the supermarket, and then they seem to be weighing each individual banana. You know, they're taking so long, and you just think to yourself, you're quietly fuming, and then I always imagine that they're replaced by the body of Kuan Yin, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of compassion and mercy and love. And while I'm sitting there fuming and looking daggers and wishing ill towards that person, Kuan Yin always turns to face me and say, "And you're the person who wants to give talks on loving kindness." So it's a journey, and one that I love. And I always remember that the Buddhist teachings themselves were an act of love. The Buddha achieved perfect realization. He had no obligations to go out and teach in the world. Indeed, it was going out and teaching that actually killed him at the end, because one of his followers gave him bad food, and he died as a result of it. But he chose to teach because this was his act of love. And he chose to act in a loving way and a forgiving way towards the people he encountered. His own cousin tried to kill him several times, and he forgave his own cousin and loved him. He came face to face with a mass murderer who kept a necklace of fingers around him, because these were all the people that he'd murdered. And so when he went to murder the Buddha turned towards him with love and ordained him as a monk. It mustn't have been an easy thing to do, but once we extend loving kindness and compassion towards ourselves, towards the people we love, towards the people we are indifferent towards, we then should try, at least, to make that next step to embrace those people we might dislike, or who might dislike us, with loving kindness as well. And that's the real challenge, you know. But if we're doing it step by step, you know, if we're exhibiting it in our lives, then one day, maybe when we're called to exhibit it on a larger scale, that's what we'll be able to do. The teaching of Metta, the Metta Sutta, which is really short, is one of the greatest, most sublime teachings of the Buddha. And I hope you'll go home this afternoon and have a read of it on the internet, because it's a beautiful and succinct piece of scripture. And I hope that at least you will consider how to take more loving and kind steps throughout your life on a day-to-day basis. And you know, even one improvement in each day is something that will contribute to your greatest store of loving kindness. We can choose to move through the world with metta. We make these choices not just hour by hour, not just minute by minute, by second by second. So if we can change just one thought in the course of the day, we've achieved something. We've made another step forward in our spiritual advancement. May you all be blessed, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks very much, Walter. I could listen to you all day. And now, Pravrajika Gayatriprana will be giving her talk on Swami Vivekananda and the Buddha.
Namo Namo Buddha Divakaraya. Namo Namo Gautama Chandrikaya. Namo Namo Ananda Gunanaraya. Namo Namo Shakya Nandanaya. In his lecture, Buddha's Message to the World in San Francisco, given in 1900, Swami Vivekananda said, "The life of Buddha has an especial appeal. All my life, I have been very fond of Buddha, but not his doctrine. I have more veneration for that character than for any other. That boldness, that fearlessness, and that tremendous love. He was born for the good of men. Others may seek God, others may seek truth for themselves, but he did not even care to know truth for himself. He sought truth because people were in misery. How to help them, that was his only concern. Throughout his life, he never had a thought for himself." That is one of the ways Swami Vivekananda assesses Buddha. As a young boy, Narendra, as he was known at that time, he had a vision of Buddha. That was the first vision he had. One day, he used to play at meditation, sitting in the room upstairs, away from the rest of the family, close the door, and seated in meditation. And as he was sitting in meditation, in deep meditation, suddenly he saw a form emerging from one of the side walls. And he kept looking at that figure. And then he found that figure was going to say something, and Naren got so frightened, he got up, opened the door, and ran out. The moment he ran out of the room, he thought, why? Perhaps it was Buddha. Let me go back and see what he is going to say. The figure has disappeared. But he later told his friends and also brother disciples that he believed that it was Buddha. And while living with Sri Ramakrishna in Kausipur garden, when Sri Ramakrishna was sick, Narendra and a few other brother disciples suddenly disappeared one day. The others, they didn't know where they had gone. They had gone to Bodh Gaya, the place where Buddha had attained enlightenment, and stayed there for 3-4 days and then came back. And there, when later he said, when he was sitting there in meditation, he had the vision of Buddha. And he was so overcome by the love of Buddha and his compassion that he could not control himself. He caught hold of the brother disciple, Tarak was sitting next to him and wept. And when they started their monastery, the first monastery in Baranagar, on the entrance door was a verse written from the Lalita Vistara. Ihasane Shishruda me Sariram, Tagostyamamsam Pralayam Jyatu, Aprapi Bodhim Bhugalpadurlapam, Maivasanat Kaya Mihastelishari. May my body be reduced to skin and bone till I realize the ultimate truth, enlightenment. I won't leave this seat. That was the determination these brother disciples, Narendra and others, took for self and God realization. We can see many similarities between these two great world teachers. Buddha found that the ideas of God prevalent at his time only made people weak and more superstitious. He protested against this undue importance given to external forms of religion instead of personal direct experience. The people have forgotten that religion is experience, not some rituals or some chanting or practices, but real experience that they have forgotten. So we can say that Buddha was a reformer who appeared on the Indian religious scene. He restated and reinterpreted the great truths given by the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion. And similar situation we find in the 19th century when Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda came on the religious scene of India. It was an Herculean task for Swami Vivekananda to rouse the people from their inertia and lethargy and the meaningless rituals and superstition and ignorance into which they were sunk. When Siddhartha was born, his father, Shuddhodana, as usual, got the astrologers to look at the horoscope and predict. And astrologers predicted that this child will either become a great ruler and emperor or a great religious teacher. For that, if he comes across the woes of human suffering, the triple woes of old age, death, and disease, he will give up the world and become a wandering monk and become a great teacher. Of course, the father wanted his son to be the ruler. No way is he going to allow his son to become a wandering monk, a beggar. No. My son should be the emperor of the universe. So he tried his best to avoid exposing him to the sufferings of humanity, protected him in every way possible. But how much he can go against destiny is different. Swami Vivekananda, we see Narendra had similarly had two visions. He later used to tell his friends that as a young boy, he used to have two visions of his future every night almost before going to sleep. One, a worldly man, very wealthy, with wife and children, possessions, and great social position. The other, a wandering monk, completely devoted to God. He felt that he had the power to realize either of them, and the choice was up to him. He could always choose between the two, and he, after thinking about it almost every night before falling asleep, he had this and he chose the life of renunciation. Renunciation of life of the world and its pleasures and leading a meditative life of the monastic is a well-established tradition and pattern in India from time immemorial. From the time of the Upanishads, we see this. People giving up the worldly life and taking up to the life of renunciation of monastics. And what is the aim of this? Is it simply to avoid the responsibilities of your daily family life? It's got a greater aim, the aim of self-realization or God realization. Realizing your identity or union with the whole world. As the Upanishad says, Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, realize that this everything is really, verily Brahman. That realization is the aim for which they give up the world. It's an extremely difficult path. It's not easy. The Upanishads describe it as difficult to pass and hard to tread, like walking on the edge of a razor. So difficult it is. Only the bold and free spirits choose this hard path. That's what Siddhartha chose and Narendra chose. The Buddhist text referred to Siddhartha's living the life in the world as the great going forth or the great renunciation. We wonder why it's called the great renunciation. People who don't have much to renounce, say, don't have much wealth, what do they renounce? They don't have much, not much wealth to be renounced. Or if you are a very sick person, you don't have a health to renounce. No health, no wealth, no youth, what will you renounce then? People say, oh, you live, enjoy the life in the world, and when you all become, afterwards you can renounce the world and become a monk. What will you renounce there? There's nothing to renounce at that time. In Hinduism, there was the idea of the last stage of sannyasa, brahmacharya, grahastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasa, the fourth stage. But then they had developed from the early days, the brahmacharya stage, the student age stage, they developed and conserved the energy. And then after fulfilling the family responsibilities and gradually going into the retired life, then they renounce. They still had energy. But now if people say, if anybody wants to take a monastic life, they say, no, don't do that now. You enjoy family life. After you become old, your children grow up, all that, then you can renounce and become a monk or a nun. What is there? There's nothing, no energy. All the energy is wasted, gone, dissipated. That is why Buddha's renunciation is called a great renunciation. He was in the prime of his youth. He was 29 years old. And he was the crown prince. He's going to inherit the kingdom after his father. So he had wealth, power, position. And he had a beautiful wife. And a son was born. He had everything. And he gave up everything, all that. And that's why his renunciation is called the great renunciation. Though his father tried to protect him from exposure to the sufferings, he was as though in a bubble inside the palace compound. He was never allowed to go out. But one day he wanted to see the world outside the palace walls. And the king made sure that the streets are all well decorated. Only young, healthy people are there on the streets. But as destiny would have, he saw an old man. Suddenly from somewhere, an old person came, tottering on a stick. And Siddhartha had never seen an old person. With great wonder, he asked his charioteer, why is this man like this? This is something strange. Then the charioteer has to explain, no, this is called old age. Will I become like that? Will my father be like that? Will my Yashodhara, his wife, will be like that? It was a big shock for him. He came back moody, worried. And then again, the next trip out, he saw a person who is sick, suffering on the roadside. Third time, it was the turn of a dead body being carried to the cremation ground. He has been exposed to all the miseries of human life, old age, disease, and death. And then again, the next time he went out, he saw a monk going around with his begging bowl, calm, serene. Again, he asked, why is this man different from others? And again, the charioteer explained, he has given up the world. He is spending his time in quest of the higher truth. And that caught his attention. And he decided he will go away. And it was compassion for the suffering humanity that moved him. He saw the suffering, so much of suffering in the life. Or either, if you may have you may be healthy, you may have all the wealth, but still you cannot avoid old age. And then you cannot avoid illness and the final terror of death. Everybody is so afraid of death. Nobody can avoid it. So to free people from this misery, Is there any way? That was his quest. Tera Piyadasi in the book Buddha's Ancient Path writes, it was his deep compassion that led him to the quest, ending in enlightenment. It was compassion that moved his heart towards the great renunciation. It was compassion that made his determination unshakable, even by the last parting glance at his beloved wife, asleep with a babe in her arms. Compassion is the most prominent characteristic in the life of Buddha, as we have been just hearing from Walter Mason. He renounced his family, kingdom, and worldly life to alleviate the suffering of the humanity. And after his enlightenment, he, for the next 45 years of his life, he spent showing people how to free themselves from this suffering, the way to suffering, through his life and teachings. Even to the last day of his life, when towards the end he was really on the moment of death, a seeker came, and when his attendant disciple Ananda tried to stop him, Buddha overheard the conversation and said, no, let him come. He will understand what I had to say. Let him come. To the last bit, he was trying to help people. We see similar sentiments in Swami Vivekananda. He used to exhort his followers to feel for the poor and the miserable. He used to say, do you feel you so-called reformers, do you feel for the poor? Have you lost your sleep because of their sufferings? A few days before Swamiji left for America in first time in 1893, he met his brother disciples, Swami Brahmananda and Swami Turiyananda, near Bombay in Mount Abu. And talking to them, to Swami Turiyananda, he said, Hari Bhai, I am still unable to understand anything of your so-called religion. But my heart has expanded very much, and I have learned to feel. We just heard Walter saying about expanding the heart. He hears Swamiji saying, my heart has expanded, and I have learned to feel. Believe me, I feel intensely indeed. And Swami Turiyananda describes how Swamiji's voice choked and tears started rolling down his cheek. And seeing that, the thought came to Swami Turiyananda. He wondered, are not these the very words and feelings of Buddha? And so, and he continues, Swami Turiyananda, talking to other monks in later years, he said, I could clearly perceive that the sufferings of humanity were pulsating in the heart of Swamiji. His heart was a huge cauldron in which the sufferings of mankind were being made into a healing balm. In another instance, Swamiji had come back, after coming back from the West, he was staying in the house of a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, Balaram Basu in Calcutta. And Swami Turiyananda had gone there to see him. He found Swami Vivekananda walking on the veranda of the upstairs, first floor, humming a song. He was all by himself. He was immersed in thought. He didn't notice Swami Turiyananda coming into the room. He just stood, Swami Turiyananda stood at the door and watched Swamiji walking. He was humming this one song, a song by Mirabai, Saint Mira. It says, the song goes on, nobody understands my sorrow. And the atmosphere was so full of sorrow, Swami Turiyananda said he could palpably feel the sorrow and he could not understand what is this. And then what happened? Swami Vivekananda, he stopped He didn't notice Swami Vivekananda standing there. Leaning on the railing of the veranda, he started sobbing. And he was wondering, what is this? What's causing so much of suffering? Suddenly he realized it is the suffering of the whole humanity. He is feeling that. It was the tremendous universal sympathy with the suffering and oppressed that was the cause of his mood. That's how Swami Vivekananda describes. People often have the misconception that somebody takes to monastic life because some difficulties at home, or failure in worldly life, or at the most, you don't care for anybody. You don't have any love in your heart for your friends and relatives. You're just a hard-hearted, dry person. So you take to monastic life. We are often asked, why did you choose this? Did you have some failures at home? Or did you have some, disappointments? That means you could not get married or didn't get the right person. These are the misconceptions. Only then you go to monastic life. That only shows that the critics have no idea of what the life of renunciation is, what renunciation is. It is the renunciation is always of the lower for the higher, the lesser for the greater. Siddhartha loved his wife and newborn son very dearly. Before leaving home, it is described how he tiptoed to the bedroom of his, that occupied by his wife, to have a last look at the face of his wife and son. He didn't dare to go inside because they may wake up and stop him from going. So he just stood at the door and had a last look at them. That shows how much affection he had for them. But his compassion for the suffering was great. Sri Ramakrishna says that if you keep a piece of iron between two magnets, one a smaller and the other a bigger magnet, towards which magnet will the iron piece move? Towards the greater one, the bigger one. Siddhartha's compassion for the suffering humanity was much greater than his love for his wife and son. Narendra had great love for his mother. He loved his mother very much. And he says about his mother, whatever good impulse I have was given to me by mother. And then he adds, consciously, not unconsciously. We can say unconsciously you get by being born in the mother. No, he says consciously given by my mother. When he decided to renounce the world, because his father had already passed away, he was the eldest son. He was supposed to be looking after the family which was almost on the point of starvation. It was a big struggle for him to decide what to do, to give up the world or stay at home and look after the family. When he decided to renounce the world, he says, tears rolled down from one eye from sadness in leaving his mother, the other eye, joy at the prospect of life of renunciation. Both are at the same time, love, joy and sadness. Both are there at the same time. So Swamiji says, for the salvation of his own soul and for the good and happiness of the many, the sannyasin is born in the world. Being free from attachment, a monk can feel the joy and misery of all. He can rejoice in the happiness of others and without feeling jealous, and again share the sorrow and unhappiness of others. To give one incident from Buddha's life, how Buddha tried to smoothen the pain of a mother. Kisa Gautami brought her dead child, dead son, dead body to Buddha, asking him to do something. She had gone round asking people somehow to bring the child back to life. The people said, no, his child is dead. What can you do? You can't do anything. But the mother in her grief cannot accept the fact. So she took the dead body, carrying the dead child to Buddha. And Buddha understood that no amount of reasoning will convince the mother. In her grief, she is completely blind to reasoning. So what to do? He said, I'll bring the child back to life, but bring me a handful of mustard seeds from a house which has not experienced death. The mother had only bring a handful of mustard seeds, the first part. The second part she heard but didn't give much importance to that. So she said, oh, that's very easy to get a handful of mustard seeds. She went to the nearest house and told them. They said, well, of course we'll give you. But then she asked, has anybody died in your house? Oh, yes, only last month the father died. The next one, the mother died, the brother died, the sister died, the son died, the daughter died. She went from house to house. Everybody had the same story. Somebody or other died sooner or later. By the end of the day, she realized, Buddha didn't have to say anything. She realized that death is inevitable. It's not something strange for you or specially for you. And she quietly came, took the dead body of the son and buried. So Buddha, in a very, very sympathetic way, made her understand the inevitability, impossibility of removing death or bringing back to life. It's not possible. We see in the life of Holy Mother, one lady came and started weeping, telling Mother that her son had passed away. And Holy Mother started weeping with the lady, the mother, as though she had lost her son. And both of them, the visitor, the lady, and Holy Mother, weeping so loudly that the monks who were looking after her came running. What's the matter? What happened? Both of them weeping. But for a few minutes, after some time, the lady calmed down, and Holy Mother gave her all they offered prasad and everything and comforted her. And she left all her sorrow there and went home peacefully. That's just to say how, without attachment, you can participate in other people's joy and sorrow. And just because becoming a monk does not make you a hard-hearted person. When Swami Vivekananda was going as a wandering monk, he was in Benares when he got the news that Balaram Basu, one of the great devotees of Sri Ramakrishna, passed away. And Swamiji was very upset and he almost wept. And the host, a great scholar, Sanskrit scholar, Pramadadas Mitra, he wondered, he asked actually, Swamiji, you are a monk. And this person is a householder. Why do you weep for him? And Swamiji said, what do you mean? Just because I have become a monk, does it mean to say that I have become hard-hearted? Don't I feel the suffering of others? Don't I feel that person has passed away? Don't I feel a sorrow? He's a devotee, great devotee. That's why I say people have got this misconception. Once you are a monk, oh, you don't feel anything. Like the other day in Adelaide, when we had a memorial service for Gayatriprana Mataji, one of the devotees giving her reminiscences said her mother had she had brought the mother from India to Adelaide, and suddenly she got sick, had taken to the hospital. The next morning, she went to see the mother how she is, and found that she's already in ICU, in coma. She was so upset, what to do? what will she tell her siblings in India? And she was so upset. Somebody said, why don't you go and talk to Maharaji? Maharaji is here. So, and she was thinking, what can Maharaji say? She is a nun. What can she say about, what sort of advice can she give me for dealing with my siblings and my problem, my family problem? But then she said, Maharaji gave her an advice that not just solve the problem, that particular problem, but a problem with which we can face all the problems of life. That is, to repeat the name of God, which will give you strength. Buddha preached a religion of self-effort. India at the time of Buddha was immersed in intense lethargy. The priests were dominating ordinary people, playing on their superstitions. And ordinary people without any self-effort simply depended on the priest to do some rituals and thus absolve themselves of the results of evil deeds and sufferings. And ultimately they hoped to gain liberation, which can never happen that way. So Buddha tried to shatter these dominance of the priest. He wanted people to put in self-effort, do spiritual practices. So he said, those who are relying upon themselves only shall not look for assistance from anyone beside themselves. It is they who shall reach the topmost height. You have to work yourself. No priest can bring salvation to you. No teacher, no guru can bring salvation to you. You have to work yourself. The teachers can, the guides, spiritual guides can give you direction, show the path. But the walking, the practice, we have to do ourselves. That is why Bhagavad Gita says, Uddhared Atmanatmanam. One should raise the lower self by the higher self. Buddha discouraged praying to this God or that God for help. He discouraged even praying to himself. He says, no, not to Buddha himself. So he said, Buddhas only point out the way. Buddha don't give you any salvation. Buddhas only point out the way. Work out your own salvation with diligence. We see the same idea of Swami Vivekananda. He lashed out his countrymen for their lethargy and weakness. He wanted them to have self-confidence, stand on their feet, and work for a better future. In one of his lectures, he said, if you pray to God to give you everything, who is it then that goes out and works? God comes to those who work hard. God helps them that help themselves. Man has infinite power within himself, and he can realize it. He can realize himself as the one infinite self. I'll conclude with another saying of Swami Vivekananda about Buddha. I would like to see moral men like Gautama Buddha, who didn't believe in a personal God or a personal soul, never asked about them, but was a perfect agnostic, and yet worked all his life for the good of all, and thought only the good of all. Well has it been said by his biographer in describing his birth that he was born for the good of the many as a blessing to the many. Bahujana hitaya, bahujana sukhaya. This quotation of Swamiji can very well apply to himself, to Swami Vivekananda himself. We offer our salutations to both these great world teachers. Thank you.
just a few announcements. We have the weekly yoga class this Thursday morning from 10 a.m. This Friday night, we have the fortnightly spiritual discussion and led by Gayatriprana. And this time we're going to have follow a theme related to the Buddha. I'll make a little PowerPoint presentation on Buddha and the axial age. Very interesting time in history when Buddha and a whole galaxy of other great teachers and founders of the different religions arose. And that'll help lead into some discussion. So that'll be from 7 p.m. this coming Friday night. Next Sunday, we have the second talk in the series, Dialogue with Death. And that is drawing on the Katha Upanishad and the discussion between the youth Nachiketa and Yama, the god of death. And Pravrajika Gayatriprana will be presenting that along with a PowerPoint presentation next Sunday from 11 a.m. We have donation plate there, donation box up the back, and please stay back now to get a share of the offered sweets and savours.